So welcome this morning to continuing saga of the Bible study, the summer study on the Psalms. I am so grateful for your regular participation in this class. This morning, Brian Stratton is teaching us. He is an associate professor of philosophy at University of North Carolina in Pembroke, where classes start in person on Wednesday. So we will be grateful for your prayers. Um, Brian's a philosophical theologian, and his academic specialty is the relationship of theology to natural science. I don't know if he'll work that into the conversation today, but you never know. We do have a PowerPoint, and I have a couple of announcements. Matt, would you pull up the first slide, please?
Yeah, give me just one moment. It's about up.
The Education Committee has a number of offerings coming up, and I just want to highlight them for you before we pray and get started. And then, so this Bible study will continue through August 23rd, and then coming on the 30th is our fall schedule. Our typical fall schedule will start on the 30th with the resumption of adult forum. The adult Bible studies on Ecclesiastes will start on September 13th. Youth Bible study will start, Godly Play and We Praise will continue. All of the classes will be virtual until further notice. The special events that are coming up is that there is a book group on Christian imagination, theology, and the origins of race, and that starts Tuesday, August 18th. Brianna Van Velzen of the chapel is coordinating that. There's a book group on the interior castle, the writings of St. Teresa, and that is starting on the Wednesday, the August 26th. The Education Committee is going to start 5 small groups. These are groups of 8 to 12 people-ish that will gather every other week for the purpose of deepening connections and deepening our spiritual lives. So watch for that. And Brian will be teaching a philosophy study group, which will meet twice a month starting on Tuesday the 1st. So we have loads of opportunities for you, and I am grateful for that. So let's begin with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, we are grateful for this time together and grateful that you have called us into your body, which is the people of God, the body of Jesus Christ. And we are grateful to be a part of these people and to a people which has spanned thousands of years and to which you continue to guide and direct and inspire. So we pray for that guidance, direction, and inspiration this day. In Christ's name we ask it. Amen.
Amen.
You're on, Brian.
Okay, well, all right, there's Psalm 80 up there. So let me say a few words about the Psalm, and then we'll read it and get into some commentary on it. If you'll notice right away, you have to the leader on lilies, a covenant of Asaph, a psalm. So just a thing to say about that, that word lilies is pretty much a guess, because it could be translated as lilies, or it could be translated as a musical instrument, or it could be translated as direction for singing, and scholars really aren't sure which of those is the proper way to go in terms of what the instructions are. And Asaph is a character who's mentioned in the Old Testament in Chronicles when King David is getting his royal court ready. He does have royal musicians who are there to create music for use in worship. The 2 leading ones are Asaph and Korah, and though there's some debate as to when this psalm may have actually been written, some scholars do believe that Asaph and Korah did form musical guilds that continued on for the music in the royal court. It was sort of like the family business for both of those. So whether any of that holds up or not, we'll see. In fact, Carol and I were laughing the other day because in a discussion with Stephen Chapman, we learned that some of the stuff we learned in seminary is now completely ignored by many scholars. So who knows? Today's scholarship may be tomorrow's rejection. But anyway, those are what folks think as for now. So this psalm is somewhat different than many of the other psalms. If it's classified as a corporate cry for help, and there are only about 5 corporate cries for help in the entire Psalter. Most of the cries for help are expressed by individuals calling for help. And these 5 corporate cries for help, at least 3 of them are attributed to this Asaph school or guild of producing psalms. So a little bit of difference between it. But it is good, since our theme for this week is the people of God. It's good that we have a corporate psalm to give rather than simply an individual one. The psalm naturally can be broken into 3 pieces, and each of those pieces or parts we have highlighted for you because they naturally divide into a refrain that creates the divisions or the sections, and we actually have those in nice blue. Why Carol put them in Carolina blue instead of Duke blue, I'm not sure, but nonetheless, there you have it. So anyway, let's start and read at least the first 3 verses of the psalm, and we'll talk a little bit about what might be there, and then we'll move into the second section and then the third. So who'd like to volunteer and kick us off with verses 1 through 3?
I'll do it, Brian.
Thank you, Craig.
Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. You who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh. Stir up your might and come to save us. Restore us, O God, let your face shine, that we may be saved.
Okay. So thank you, Craig. Right away, you see that this psalm is using one of the dominant images that is used for God in the Hebrew Bible, and that is referring to the Lord as a shepherd. And when they refer to the Lord as the shepherd, that's not simply referring to actual shepherds that tend flocks, but shepherd is also a common image used for a king. So Yahweh is not being diminished in any way by referring to him as a shepherd, but rather this idea of a benevolent leader who cares for the people, nourishes the people, tends the people, looks after the people, is being invoked here as well. And in fact, in the book of Isaiah, you can find quite a bit of this shepherd imagery in referring to God. One other thing we should notice is there's a reference to Joseph. And if you remember, if you go back to Genesis, the 12 sons of Jacob, or Israel, as he becomes to be known, when he's getting ready to die and pronounce his blessings, you folks all know the story of how Joseph was the one who was sold into slavery into Egypt and eventually rescues the tribes. Joseph is sometimes used to refer to the whole people, all of Israel, because Joseph was the one who delivered them from that potential famine that could have cost their lives. And Ephraim and Manasseh and Benjamin here, kind of an odd grouping in a way. Ephraim and Manasseh are the northern tribes. If you remember, when the kingdom split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, there were 2 tribes that remained loyal to the descendants of King David, and that was Judah and Benjamin. And Ephraim and Manasseh would have then become symbols for the northern tribes. So there's been some debate among scholars as they try to relate the historicity, the location of this psalm in terms of history. Some have said that it's a plea in light of the northern kingdoms about to be conquered or destroyed. Others have said, no, this is the southern kingdom looking back after having seen what happened to the northern kingdom. But it's really hard, and there's no definite way to settle that issue. But there is quite a bit of debate in terms of social location. The social location probably doesn't matter all that much for us because it really is a group of people that are in desperate states. They're worried, they're concerned, and so it could apply to many different contexts other than the actual literal historical context in which they are found. A couple of other things to note. It talks about God who is enthroned upon the cherubim, and probably don't need to remind you folks that the cherubim are these angelic beings, for lack of a better thing to call them. And the cherubim are found on the Ark of the Covenant. Their wings form the mercy seat of the place where the high priest would make sacrifice. And if you remember, the Ark of the Covenant is a portable throne for God. Before the Israelites had built a temple or anything for a permanent location, as the tent of meeting went through the wilderness, the ark would have been carried before, and God would come and appear to the people in the form of a cloud of glory and rest upon these cherubim as his seat, his throne. In addition, as you move beyond that imagery, you do find some of the prophets talking about God being enthroned in heaven, and his chariot or throne is pulled by these cherubim or angelic beings. They're bright shining beings, they have wings. They're described differently. In some they have 4 faces, in some they have 2 faces. In fact, one rabbi commenting upon when he was asked what cherubim looked like, he said, no one really knows because the scriptures portray them in different ways. Also these cherubim, in addition to being found in imagery in Israel, can also be found in other cultures in the ancient Near East. Usually the Babylonians or the Assyrians would portray these things as the head of a man, the body of a lion, and then the wings of an eagle. And some of that imagery does get carried over into the Hebrew Bible. They use it to describe these beings in very much the same way. One of the things that scholars don't mention, but I've wondered about, that since the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and some of these other people thought these cherubim were divine beings, godlike beings, it's quite clear that for the Israelites, these beings are subordinate, and in fact, they either form the seat on which the God of Israel sits, or they're indentured servants to him in the sense that they pull his chariot and move him along. So there might be a little one-upsmanship theologically by putting the cherubim in this kind of position. And of course, there is the plea for God to restore them, to let his face shine. Again, those of you that have read the Hebrew Bible quite a bit know that asking for God to shine is a very common image, a very common metaphor. When God appears, he often appears as a shining pillar of fire or shining cloud. So by asking God or asking for the face of God to shine, they're asking for God to be very present with them. I'll stop there for a moment and see if you folks have any questions or comments about anything we've talked about so far. All right then, hearing none, let's move on verses 4 through 7. Would someone take those? Of course, I can't really see who's here. My participants are only, I only have about 4 people up. So would somebody volunteer to take them?
I could do it.
Thank you.
O Lord God of hosts, How long will you be angry with your people's prayers? You have fed them with the bread of tears and given them tears to drink in full measure. You make us the scorn of our neighbors. Our enemies laugh among themselves. Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved.
Thank you, Lois. Okay, here's reference to the Lord God of hosts. And oftentimes when the Israelites or the psalmists or other people are praying for God to be active as a deliverer, especially in terms of battle, there is reference to God being the God of hosts. And we're told here that he is angry with their prayers. The word there in Hebrew is fairly interesting because it means to either smoke or to blow hot air out of one's nostrils. So you get the idea of the psalmist referring to God almost snorting like a bull. He's so upset with the people and the way they've been praying. And then we have reference to, and this is a beautiful image, by the way, feeding them with the bread of tears and giving them tears to drink in full measure. One of the things that struck me about the bread of tears was to go back to Genesis chapter 3. And if you remember, when God places judgment on the man and the woman after they've sinned, one of the things he says to the man is that you shall earn your bread by the sweat of your face. And here the psalmist is using poetic imagery to say that the bread is a bread of tears. So I guess we could say that's even more distressing than simply eating your bread from hard work or sweat, but your bread is actually coming from tears of sorrow at what you've encountered and what's going to come forward. And of course, being the scorn or mocked by the neighbors and the enemies is also a fairly common theme throughout the Psalms as well. One other thing I'll call your attention to before we move on to the bulk of the Psalm, look at the highlighted refrain. If you look in verse 3, it says, "Restore us, O God, let your face shine, that we may be saved." And then in verse 7, "Restore us, O God of hosts, let your face shine, that we may be saved." So just notice that distinction or that difference that's taking place there. Matt, can we move on to the next section? Okay. Let's see. How about someone take verses 8 through 13 for us?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. Why then have you broken down its walls, so that all who pass along the way pluck its fruit? The boar from the forest ravages it, and all that move in the field feed on it. Did you say 8 to 13? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just 13 for now. Thank you, Patience. Okay, here is the dominant metaphor that serves for the psalm, and that is Israel as the vine of God. And if you look to the right, you'll see sort of my outline of this section where they are plucked out of Egypt, then they are planted in the new land, and now they're being plundered. And then, of course, we'll get to the other two a little bit later. I was telling Carol that this kind of reminds me of my preaching days where you want to catch alliteration for all your points, right? So that they're easy to remember. But Israel is the vines which God takes out and plants, clears the ground. This vine prospers, it grows, it's very prominent, but then its walls are broken down. And the common way for building a wall around your vineyard in those days was to plant a hedge. Usually a very thorny hedge would be planted all around the perimeter of the vineyard. And so it would be very hard for anything to get in there unless they be mangled or torn by the thorns. But evidently one of the walls of the hedge has come down. And now you have people plucking its fruit at random, taking what is rightfully theirs. And then we have the boar from the forest. And interesting term here, this term for boar. This is the only place in the Hebrew Bible where it's translated in that way, as boar. Usually it's translated as swine or domestic pigs or hogs. But this is clearly trying to capture the idea that this is a wild animal. And these wild animals are quite fearsome, and they can cause tremendous amounts of destruction. If you remember in the New Testament, Jesus says, it is the little foxes that get in and spoil the grapes. Well, a boar just doesn't slip in and spoil the grapes. It tears the whole vine all to pieces. So this is a very devastating thing. And these boars remain a problem in Israel. There's record of, during the Crusades, Richard the Lionhearted demonstrating his bravery by killing a boar in front of all of his men to show his macho prowess. But Matt, can we pull up the other slide? Ah, there we go. So there's a lovely picture of a boar, if a boar can take a lovely picture. You can see it's a pretty ferocious looking thing with big tusks. And over to the right, you can see in contemporary Israel, boars just walking down the street. Now, obviously, these are not quite as feral as one that would be found in the woods. But notice that they're still a nuisance. If you see the headline from one of the papers from Israel, as I was looking for images of the boar, boar eats Israeli boy's homework, giving him best excuse ever. And there actually, not that you folks really want to do it, but there actually is a video of one of these boars. The little boy left his backpack out on the patio, or and there's a boar attacking the backpack and consuming it. And I just thought that was interesting, that not only do they spoil vines and grapes, but probably, you know, they have a taste for algebra or something as well, as they tear out the backpack. All right, can we go back now, Matt? Okay, so the boar ravages it, and then also other animals, it says, feed upon it. So the vine is in trouble. It is being plundered, and so that is, this metaphor gives you the reason why that they're appealing for help. And by the way, one of the things to note about this extended metaphor here is that it is an allegory, not simply an analogy or a poetic image. And for those of you that studied English or took literature or whatever, you know that an allegory is a fairly unique type of literature. If you take a parable uses lots of imagery to tell a story, but a parable usually makes one point. Or if you take an analogy or poetic image, usually it's referring to one particular thing. But in an allegory, every element of the story, every image used stands in for something else. So the vine clearly is Israel. God is serving as the planter of the vineyard. And then the nations that are bespoiling them are respectively the passersby, the boar, and the other animals that are in. Now, this is a place where the historical context might be useful, because then we would know exactly who the boar is that's threatening them. But that's the idea being brought about there. And there are examples of allegory in Western literature and other literatures as well. For example, Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene is one standard allegory from literature that has been quite famous and quite influential. If you read C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that is, there's a lot of allegory in that. And in fact, that was one of the points of discord between Tolkien and Lewis. I'll just throw in a little more trivia there while we're at it. When they asked Tolkien what he thought about Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien said, "I tend to dislike allegory in all its forms." So there's just a little bit of difference between the two on that. Before we move on, does anybody have any questions or comments you'd like to raise about this particular section?
I had a quick one. I was just this image, this allegory, reminds me of the Song of the Vineyard in Isaiah. I think Isaiah,
Yeah.
chapter 5. And I was just curious whether you had any sense of which might have come first. The Isaiah is sort of saying, "This is how it had to happen. Don't you understand?" Or this one is sort of, "Why is this happening?"
That's a great question, Craig. And to be perfectly frank with you, I don't know which one was written first. A lot of it would depend upon how you date this psalm, whether it occurs during the fears for the initial conquest of the northern kingdom, or whether it refers to later the southern kingdom being carried away. I guess we'll have to defer. Probably there's some scholar of Old Testament that's probably trying to figure that out right now, and maybe they'll have the answer for us. I suppose it could go either way, and you could make arguments either way. But again, the historical context somewhat eludes us in any kind of definite way for that. That's a really good question. Yeah. Others? I think all these mute microphones intimidate people and they don't ask questions.
I'll read it if you don't mind.
Oh, okay.
Turn again, O God of hosts. Look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your right hand planted. They have burned it with fire. They have cut it down. May they perish at the rebuke of your countenance. But let your hand be upon the one at your right hand, the one you have made strong for yourself. Then we will never turn back from you. Give us life, and we will call on your name. Restore us, O Lord of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved.
Thank you. Notice here that there's an attempt to placate the Lord, right? An appeal to, we promise you, God, if you'll do this for us, we'll not turn from you again, et cetera, et cetera. And then the goal is they hope that they will prosper or be saved. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to call attention to the refrain. If you remember, can we go back, Matt, just one, and then we'll do this. Notice here you have restore us, O God, and then the second one, O God of hosts. And now if we can go back to the next one. Restore us, O Lord God of hosts. Right? It's almost as if as the refrain builds, the acknowledgement of God, or we could say the praise of God, the identification of God, intensifies as the psalm goes from simply God to the God of hosts, which in that, and then you have the personal name of God being expressed as well. So there's a kind of escalating in the urgency of the plea and the forming of the plea here. Let's look at verse 17 just quickly. Let your hand be upon the one at your right hand, the one whom you have made strong for yourself. Now, not in the NRSV, because textual scholars believe that it is a gloss later added by a scribe in Hebrew in the copying. There's another phrase that comes after that, the one whom you have made strong, that says, the son you have taken as your own. And again, this is a scribal edition. That's why it doesn't appear in this text. So there's some debate about who this one is at the right hand and the one that has been made strong. Now, a lot of early Christians, you can probably guess what they did with that. They jumped on it and saw it as a foreshadowing of the Messiah, or the foreshadowing of Jesus, who is the strong one at the right hand of God. But that's probably not what the psalmist would have had in mind. And it's probably not the king that is in mind, but rather the one at the right hand, the one that's been made strong, is probably the people themselves. These are the ones. If you go back to the vine imagery, if you remember, the vine is mighty, it is covering the ground, it is very strong, it's very powerful. And so probably this is a reference back to the people themselves, as opposed to simply an individual. And that fits also very well with the notion that this is a corporate psalm. It's something that's being expressed on behalf of all the people.
Brian, you talked a minute ago about intensification, and as we look at this, the psalm really sort of progressively intensifies. And each of the refrains is basically saying to God, look, this means you. I want to get your attention. But then the psalmist is basically allying the people with the chosen of God, and therefore making it even more urgent that God would step in and solve the problem.
Yeah, very good point, Jack. Yeah, it really is escalating or intensifying, as it were. And I like your idea of getting God's attention. It's God, then God of hosts, and then you, Yahweh, right? Yeah, we're talking to you. Yeah, good point. I like that. That's a good insight. Very good. Other questions or comments?
I was always puzzled in this and other similar psalms about the conditional nature of Israel's following God. So if you do all these things, then we will never turn back from you. Well, maybe if they weren't turning their back from him already, he might not have to be called in. So I find that confusing and troubling, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's constant, and well, not just in the Psalms, but throughout the Hebrew Bible. And certainly the Israelites were not the only ones prone to this. Just think of all the stories we can hear about deathbed repentances today, where people get in distress. And there's an absolutely funny scene in a movie called The End, in which Burt Reynolds is the actor, and he discovers that he's going to die. And so rather than die, he decides he's going to take his own life. So he swims all the way out into the ocean with the hope of drowning himself. And then one of his friends happens to come by in a helicopter and says, they goofed up the test. They gave you the wrong diagnosis. There's nothing wrong with you. Well, as he's swimming back, right, toward shore, he keeps saying, Lord, if you just let me make it back to shore, I'll keep all 10 commandments. I'll go to church every Sunday, et cetera, et cetera. And then, he gets in a little closer. Well, Lord, if you let me make it back, I'll keep 9 of the commandments, and I'll try to make it every other week until finally, and he keeps progressively diminishing what he's going to do for the Lord. And finally, when he stands on the shore, he says something like, thank you, big guy. I'll try to do a little better than I have in the past, or something like that. So these distressful repentances, often folks do forget in the good times what it is that is owed to the Lord and this kind of thing. Yeah. Other questions, comments? All right, then, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to break us into small groups. Matt, have we got that slide up there somewhere? Is Matt still there?
Yeah, hang on just 1 second.
No problem, Matt. Okay, I'd like for us to break into small groups. And as I said, this is a psalm of corporate identity. So I would like for us, as we break into groups, I'd like for you to think what in this psalm shows that Israel is genuinely a people. What is it that binds them together as an actual people? And what are the things in the psalm that would promote a sense of unity among the people? And I'd like for us to do this. I think last time, let's take about 15 minutes, because I think there are at least 5 or 6 elements in this psalm that we can tease out. And if you could pick one person to report back to the group, and then after that time, we'll share what we see as elements of this psalm that bring us into unity.
And if you may need a physical Bible, or we can put in the chat a link to an electronic Bible if that would be helpful.
Carol, I don't have the breakout group option. If you want to, real quick, I'll do that.
Does everyone have a Bible, or does anyone need a link to the text?
Harold, did you hear him say he didn't have the breakout group option?
Hello, everybody. We're a small group, so we can unmute. Anyone have any thoughts? I just sent in the chat the link to Psalm 80 if anyone needs the psalm. And remember, friends, that Beth's microphone doesn't work, so she's going to type her questions to us or comments. So I don't think we all know each other. Should we introduce each other first? So I'm Carol Gregg. I'm pastor of the congregation. And I've been here 7 years. Janet and Jay, would you introduce yourselves?
Oh, Oliver is coming too. I'm Janet, and I've been at the congregation 10 years, about from Indiana originally.
I'm Jay. I get to be married to Janet, and as you can tell, Oliver wants to be with the woman of his life.
Kathy?
I'm Kathy. I've been a member for, I don't know, 12 years, I guess. And yeah, I'm just anxious to meet everybody.
Great. Beth lives in Durham, member of First Presbyterian Church, and her partner is a member of Immaculate Conception. Terrific. Rhonda?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm class of 99, and I started watching online during COVID, and was excited that you all were focused on the Psalms. Nice to meet everybody. I live in New York.
Wonderful. So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Eunice?
Hi, my name is Eunice, and I'm originally from West Africa, and I'm a recent admitted student at Duke. So, and would I say I live with Carol or?
Yes, she's our housemate.
Okay.
So the question for us is, and Matt just sent it out to all of us again, is what aspects of this psalm show the corporate identity of Israel, point to us, remind us that this is a people, plural. Anybody have any thoughts?
Well, I thought you brought a vine out of Egypt is a corporate image.
Oh, that reminds me, we need someone to report back, and it shouldn't be me. Somebody want to volunteer to report back? Beth is out of the running. Anyone else? Kathy, would you, since you were bold to start this? No, she doesn't want to. Okay. Janet or Jay, would you?
My wife's volunteering me.
She will. I have Oliver. He's a handful.
Okay. All right. So go ahead, Kathy. You were saying.
I was saying that one of the corporate images in the Psalms is you brought a vine out of Egypt. I mean, that's really all of Israel.
Yep. Nice. What else do we see in that?
I can do another one if you want.
Sure.
I think you led Joseph like a flock. Isn't that Joseph being part of that image of Israel early on?
Yep.
I also see kind of a corporate covenant that kind of holds the people together. They have this covenant with God. So when in verse 1 it says, "O shepherd of Israel," is like identifying God as the corporate God of Israel. If that works.
Okay.
I don't know Hebrew idioms and how they get translated or so, but I mean, all of these things are in plural. I mean, it's we, us, them, so that it's, I mean, they're using pronouns that are for a group, not for an individual.
Yeah.
It's not woe is me, it's woe is us. It's we're the ones who, are getting, and he's right, I like that, the bread of tears. I mean, we're getting the bread of tears. It's not just me or you, it's all of us.
Yeah. We're in this together. Yep. Beth notes that it's interesting about the vines, they generally have shoots that come out from them.
Yeah.
True. Yep. So it's multifaceted, but still connected. Even I think the imagery of the walls around the vineyard, that shows that there's sort of a boundary around us. So there's a group that is surrounded by the wall. And then when that wall is broken down and the boar ravages it. But that seems to me to point to a group as well, drawing them in. Anything else that you see? Brian said there are 5 or 6. How many do we have, Jay? I feel like we're on a little hunt.
We have 5.
The mighty cedars, the mighty cedars, whose with its branches reached as far to the sea. So like a grove would be a corporate type thing too, a grove of cedars.
Yeah. Well, and the expansiveness, if it reaches to the sea, an individual can't reach that far.
Right.
Yeah. What else, I'm going off the prompt, what else strikes you about this psalm? Is there anything in particular that is particularly appealing or distressing or piques your interest about this psalm?
Well, it's the first time since probably, grade school that I've even thought about when they talk about the God of hosts. Because, I grew up in a Catholic tradition, and we just assumed if they're talking about the God of hosts, that's the sacrament. That's because the host is what you got in communion. So we just assumed, well, the Jewish people must have known what was coming, and that's why that was there. Because the only other way we really learned about hosts was in science, when the host was the place where the parasite lived. And we didn't really like the idea of being where the parasite lived. So obviously there must be something else. I don't know why the Jewish group would pick, the Lord of hosts, the God of hosts, because it shouldn't fit either one of those things.
Isn't it a military image? The hosts, legions, groups for battle? That's where my head went.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's God, the army, the captain of the army.
Yeah.
Host also means welcomer. A host, it welcomes you into the home.
That's true.
There's so many
ways of looking at it.
So many
our version of host, yeah.
Yeah, lots of faces of hosts.
Beth asks, what do the cedars represent? Mountains are covered with mighty cedars with its branches. I don't know if they represent anything in particular. They're common trees of the area.
Yeah. Well, they're huge too, right?
Yes, I believe so. Eunice, if I'm putting on you a spot, just tell me so. But Eunice, you were telling me that in Africa, these psalms that ask for protection from the enemy are very much appreciated.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit? How your context with why folks appreciate these kinds of psalms?
I think it has to do with our experience generally in Africa, and like I said, one's experience kind of like helps you to interpret the scriptures, especially the Psalms. So for us in Psalms, it kind of like resonates with what we go through daily as individuals. So when we see such Psalms in the scriptures, it kind of like gives us hope that this is not peculiar to us. And also it kind of like reminds us that God is in it with us, like just as the Psalms, like in every case with the Psalms, there's always an ending of praise. It ends with praise. So for us, like when we come to these Psalms, we kind of like have that confident expectation that God will always show up in whatever situation, whatever it is our experience is speaking out to us. So yeah, it is personal and it is encouraging, and it kind of like, I think the Psalms are like an everyday thing for us, because most of it like kind of is a pictorial representation of our worship. Yeah, so in essence, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts about this psalm? In one sense, this psalm doesn't quite end in praise, because it has that refrain, restore us, O Lord, let your face shine that we may be saved. It's not quite there yet, but it's an expectation, confident expectation that is coming. Restore us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more like you, in any case, you know that your hope is in God. Like there is no other, there is no other, like that, the help that you need has to come from God. So even if God is like striking you with maybe for some part, you kind of sin, and God is like reprimanding you or like disciplining you, you also know the fact that your salvation, your restoration still comes from the same God. So it's like there is no life outside of God for you. So in any case, that there's that expectation that all that I desire, my living is in God's presence. So yeah.
Oh, excuse me. And Beth pondered, what are the modern or communal laments, corporate laments? Are there any today? Seems like they're more individual today. What do you think? Are there corporate requests today? I do think that, you know, with the pandemic, we have heard the phrase, we're all in this together. You know, even though we are all in it together in different ways. But
The other one that really struck me was that for this time is Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Segway.
I also think that in literature, I think that James Baldwin is a total lament of what happened before Black Lives Matter, but he's talking about a corporate lament in all of his writings.
Yeah. Good. Did you think of any, Beth? Corporate laments? Yes, those are. Yeah, Black Lives Matter too.
Yeah.
Climate change is another corporate lament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another one.
Brian, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I don't know. I'm having trouble getting used to this grid, right? You know, you see people always. It almost feels like I'm on the old Brady Bunch TV show. You know how they used to all show up in their little boxes and look around at one another. But you know, we need to look straight ahead, I guess, as opposed to that. Showing my age.
About the Brady Bunch. That's
showing my age, aren't I? Yeah, that's talking about the Brady Bunch. You know, as we were talking about unity of what makes us a people. I think for many of us, it was television, wasn't it, when we were kids? Because, you know, you only had like 3 channels, and so everybody watched the same programs. They talk about what was on TV.
Yeah, versus thousands of channels now.
Yeah, we got thousands of channels and nothing on, it seems like.
That's true. We stay with Perry Mason and the Lone Ranger. That tells all about age.
Okay. Well, let's see. Let's let some of the other groups see. The group I was in, we'll wait a while to do this. Who would like to start us off sharing what you talked about in your group?
Can we start off?
You certainly may.
Okay. I forgot what group number we were, but it was a wonderful group. But we came up with several words that we saw that identified that this was a corporate, Israel was a corporate group. When the words flock, sheep, people, us, we, our, neighbor, branches, vine. Those are things that we came up with that identified this people as a corporate people. That's all we have to say, Brian.
Well, that's plenty. You nailed a lot of those corporate pronouns and images. Good. What about another group?
Okay, our group came up with actually the same things, similar images. We came up with a couple of more things. We were noticing that in some of the verses, they were basically, they were taking credit for things they had done, and then when they came into problems, they were kind of blaming God for things. Like verse 12, why hast thou then broken down her hedges? And, you know, we said, I mentioned there was kind of an old joke you probably heard, but when the kid in the classroom gets an A, he says, I made an A. When he makes an F, he says, the teacher gave me an F. So, but we mentioned also Ephraim, Benjamin, Manasseh, and also the vine thing, because the vine is one thing with roots, branches, that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. Good. How many groups did we have? I don't know.
Well, I get to represent another group, Brian.
Ah, thanks, Jay.
So we did many of the same things. The things that were a little different is we started getting into the cedars and how cedars grow in a grove, and so and it's going from the sea to the river, so that this is a large group. We looked at all the pronouns too, and that what they're using are us, we, them, as opposed to the individual pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's hard to believe, Brian, but we actually got off task. And we started then talking about what are our current laments. And so we thought this is a wonderful time for lament between the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter, climate change, and we certainly have corporate laments right now.
And the possible tropical storm or hurricane that may be heading our way too, right?
Yeah, but that's just North Carolina.
It really does feel like we're in the biblical apocalypse at times, doesn't it? But you know, when I read the book of Revelation, you know, it's all full of all this dramatic imagery and warfare and all this. And I never really imagined that most of the apocalypse would just be sitting on the couch. I thought it would be, you know, a little more dramatic than that. But oh well, you know, you never know what to expect. Okay, another group.
Our group talked about Israel having a common history, looking at the verse with them coming out of Egypt. We also mentioned kind of collectively having an enemy, or being like the target of scorn and mockery and oppression. That can be something that provides unity. We also talked about one of the verses that mentions you who are seated on the or enthroned upon the cherubim. That's uses some iconography, some symbolism that is common to the group, that there are these signs or metaphors or images that the group collectively is able to understand kind of the symbolic communication that's taking place with those signs.
Okay. Do we have another group, or is that?
Yes, we had a group, and we said the things that have already been said about the pronouns and the idea of the vine being a collective with, you know, the fruit being the grapes, which are, you know, a bunch of the grapes, etc. But one thing, slightly different, I guess. I also have a Jerusalem Bible, and some of the images were slightly different in it, and particularly towards the end, verse 17 says, "May your hand protect those at your side, the child of Adam you have strengthened for yourself." never again will we turn away from you. Give us life, and we will call upon your name. And so we talked a little bit about some of the different wordings, you know, and how that would be. But that I particularly like that one, you know, to protect, may your hand protect those at your side, rather than the one in the NRSV. And so that's the only unique contribution we would have, because folks have already stated the others that we picked out.
Yeah, and I think it is important, again, and I guess we're getting close on time here, but one of the things we did talk about as well is this importance of corporate salvation as opposed to the excessive individualism that we often see in our culture today. My salvation, my trouble, whereas this is very much seeing us as a group. God saves a people, God saves a church, right? So we're made to be in fellowship, in communion with one another. All right.